started. Okay. Well, welcome everyone to our first session in our winter webinar series. We're very pleased to be able to present Chris Jones today and to share some information with you about what's happening with the Pine Chemicals Association now and going into 2022. So as we get started, I do want to remind everyone, thankfully this is, everyone will be muted during this presentation, which is why we will be accepting our questions by written communication only. Mr. Jones's presentation has been vetted through our legal counsel and has been given a thumbs up, so everything is fine here from a standpoint of antitrust, but we do have an antitrust policy, which is on the screen. So I will just make a reminder that there will be no discussion of pricings and market and any type of fostering of monopolizing the market. With that being said, we'll move forward. I did have some audio options in case anyone had questions about how to connect or if you are having issues connecting. So I'll leave that on the screen for a moment, but I believe that everyone's okay. I haven't seen any questions or issues coming through. I will mention that if you have any problems throughout the webinar, please feel free to send us a chat. We will be accepting questions throughout the webinar, and if you are not familiar with this conferencing system platform, you do have a dashboard which includes some different options to pose questions. So you will see a question box that you can submit, and we will be collecting those and vetting those at the end of our conference presentation. As a reminder, we do have some additional webinars that will be forthcoming this year. So we have a very full December, beginning on December 2nd and completing with December 16th. So all of you who have registered to attend this event will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording of this presentation, as well as links to be able to register for those future presentations. Looking at our events, I know that one of the big questions for our PCA members and our industry is regarding our conferences and meetings. Unfortunately, in 2021 and in 2022, we were not able to hold our conferences face-to-face, but we will be resuming face-to-face meetings next year with our spring meeting. We want to just let everyone know that we will be taking extra precautions at our events, particularly because we have such a global audience. I was mentioning to Mr. Jones prior to the start of the call that we have over 15 countries represented on the call today. So we truly have a global presence with our industry, and we want to ensure that anyone attending is safe and healthy while they're there and once they leave. So looking at our events, we are so delighted to be able to return face-to-face with our spring meeting that will be April 27th through the 29th. It will be at PGA National Resort and Spa in Palm Beach Gardens. A very accessible location, whether you're coming into West Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, or Orlando. It's a very accessible location. We're very happy to be able to host our event there, and that they have the availability to be able to welcome us to their property. I think that you'll be very pleased with the property. It's a beautiful location, and as I said, very accessible to our international audience. So, looking at our international conference for next year, the planning is underway, and we are anticipating that it will be in the latter part of September, as we generally have it in Northern Europe. Right now, Helsinki is our top destination choice, and we are trying to finalize plans and conversations now to see if we can lock Helsinki in place. Okay, so we are very pleased to be able to welcome Chris Jones of Descartes. Chris has over 40 years of experience in the supply chain market, and he's a thought leader in logistics. He has a good number of blogs and publications, which is actually how I came upon him and how we became acquainted. Actually read one of his articles recently that was a fantastic synopsis on our global shipping crisis, and reached out to him, and he has graciously agreed to provide a presentation to all of you all today. He does live in Boston, or outside of Boston, Massachusetts, but he is joining us today from his home in Maine. He's leaf peeping, I believe, up there with his wife. And so we are very pleased to be able to welcome him today, and I will be transferring things over to him. So Chris, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time, and as we know, with our industry, shipping has become one of the largest challenges that we're facing. And it's not just our industry, it's the entire global economy that is being affected. So with that being said, I will turn things over to you to let you get started, to tell us what we can expect this year and coming into 2022.
Great, thanks, Amanda. My first question is, can you see the full screen and the globe spinning?
No, I actually just see the regular mode.
Okay, give me 1 second then. This is always a challenge.
Sure. If you go to your menu bar and select slideshow, you can change your monitor if you have it going to a different monitor.
It is, and okay, so let's do this way. So I tell you what I'm going to do. Just let me try one more thing here. Where is it? Oh, oops. All right, so slideshow. All right, now, come on. Oh, sorry. It's not, what are you seeing now?
I canceled it, so you'll have to accept it again on your screen.
Okay, gotcha, sorry. All right. We may just go with it as is. I'll shoot.
Okay.
When I get it up here. Give me 1 second.
I can actually give you keyboard and mouse control from mine. So if you'd like, I will be happy to get us started.
Yeah, so why don't we do that?
Okay, sure. Here, let me show my screen, and then here, I'll just give you my keyboard and mouse control. Perfect.
Actually,
thanks everyone for bearing with us through that technology challenge. Things can be planned in advance, but things never go as we anticipate. So thank you very much for your patience. And here we go. Let's get started, Chris.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, everyone. So I've got a lot to cover. There's a lot of things going on. Feel free to ask questions. I will tell you, most of the data I'm going to show today is, I'll call it a little bit more US centric. We actually have data for about 70% of the global trade and trade lanes. But I'm going to use this, and I'll just say the following, which is, this should give you some insights into some things that you want to track for yourselves, whether you be here or in the US or anywhere else abroad. There are some fundamentals that are going on that are, that are important to know about, and we're going to cover those today. So the what advances the slide? How do I? Oh, there we go. Okay, so we're going to cover a couple things here. The current situation, which I know everybody knows about, but I'll give you some notion of how big is big, how big or how bad it is. Underlying factors, these are going to be really important to know about, because there are some things that are going on that are pretty significant in terms of their impact and why we're seeing such really overheated global transportation in particular, and then just some general recommendations. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is just to give you a notion of what's going on. So what you're looking at here is a chart of, I'll call it the 4 years prior to the pandemic. And what you can do is, if you, it's almost plays out fairly easy to understand. The bottom gray is 2016, and the top red is 2019. So you can see over time that volume's already been headed north in terms of containers into the U.S. The only little, and it follows a pattern, by the way, and you can see it. It slows down going into February, March, and then kind of moves up through the peak season in May, June, July, the summer. No surprise for all of that, and then begins to dip down again, really, as most people have moved goods, in particular for holiday seasons. By October, it starts to slow down. Only one exception there is on that purple bar. You'll see it moved up in 2018, and that was because of pending tariffs that had been announced by the previous administration in the U.S., and so people were getting inventory moving forward. Now I'm going to show you another chart of that really kind of paints the picture of what's going on. So if we look at the blue one, that was 2019. So if you think about this, 2019 was really the biggest year prior to 2020 and now. And 2020 on here is the red. And you can see that shipping really took a huge dive. Remember when basically China shut itself down starting in January. The U.S. shut itself down, and many other countries did as well. And so, there was a huge decline in shipping. But look at what happens by the time we get to July. By the time we get to July, the economy is back in gear, and it is actually pretty amazing, not just here, but in so many other countries, that how economies have done fairly well despite some of this, the challenges with COVID. So when you really look, by the time you get to August, you can see the difference. We have already eclipsed the 2019 numbers pretty significantly, and we just kept moving through December. There's no real decline there. Now look at the green one. That's this year. That's 2021, and you can see that we are way above. And of course, there was an artificial dip there last year, but we were way above the 2019 numbers. And so we have the latest numbers that just came out about 4 or 5 days ago, and you can see that in October of 2021, we were 3% above last year, but 23% above the previous year. So that to me is really the number that people need to understand, and we see this on a global basis, that we are moving goods at a level that is really unprecedented. And if you think about 2 years growth of almost a quarter of the volume, that's really hard for ports and I'll call it logistics ecosystems and supply chains, et cetera, to really handle that, right? Our view is, and we'll get to this a little bit later, but our view is we're going to see more of the same. We'll see this 2.5 million number. It might be a little bit slower in November and a little bit in December, but we don't see the big declines coming based on at least what we're understanding from the market. So this is this is why you're seeing, for instance, many of your shipments being challenged to get there, right? So what I did was, actually, let me go back. I think I bumped it too quickly. Sorry. Okay, now we go. All right, so what I'm going to show you here is I actually had some data pulled. I asked Amanda for some, whoops, I think I probably hit it too quickly, for some HS codes for pine oil for both U.S. import and export. This one is interesting here. This is import. It's not a lot of money, mind you. And we did it at a fairly detailed level. And just to be so everybody understands, this is everything that's specifically declared. And I have a specific HS code, which I did not unfortunately include on this slide. But what you can see here is that 2019 was a much bigger number than 2020. And then 2021 also started off slowly, but has really accelerated. So I don't know your industry that well to be able to comment on that, but I can, I can tell you that, whoever's moving some goods, and it's not a lot of goods at this point, they're finding ways to be able to get them into the country. The same thing on export. Export is really kind of I call it, and there's more, it's almost 4 times as much volume exported. Those numbers are fairly consistent. It's interesting. And so let me hypothesize here so everybody understands what's going on in the market. If you can get things in containers, you stand a very good chance of getting them out of the country, especially if you're moving on the West Coast to Asia. And the reason for that is that there is a tremendous amount of open containers that are moving fairly quickly from once they are basically unloaded back to China, wherever, Vietnam, etc., because of the prices that they're able to get. And anybody who's in the shipping business these days knows how expensive it is to get a container. Now, the gotcha has been the following here, which is, I said it earlier, if you can get the containers. In a lot of cases, the logistics companies are really not even waiting for someone to be able to load containers. So containers are still scarce, but at least this chart shows that the folks that are exporting here are finding ways of making it happen. So when we talk about waiting, okay, this has been one that's been in the press. Los Angeles in particular, Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach. And so what I did was we pulled some data on wait times at ports, and I'll explain why this is really important to understand. August was probably the worst at 15.3 days, so that's literally from the ship sitting out there from the time they are ready to enter the port till they can actually enter and unload. And it hasn't declined very much, just down roughly 1 day. There were some announcements around what the Biden administration is doing, working with the ports, and the ports going to 24 hours and so forth. But when you actually look at the numbers, they're not that big. So we're seeing a little bit of a decline here, but how you want to think about this is the following. If it takes 25 days to steam from China to the port of LA, you got to add another 15 days on top of that. So your effective is 40 days here. So I'll talk about this later, but this is why it's important to understand some of these things. But if you also look at it, the Port of New York and New Jersey is at 8.4 days, and Savannah is almost at 10 days on the East Coast. So, as we look at that elevated, highly elevated container import volumes, ships are sitting everywhere. And so it doesn't mean every port is this way, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but this is one of the reasons why, for instance, as you're looking to get things, it's either extended or highly variable in what you're trying to import. So now, whoops, here we go. Whoops, it jumped twice. So let's talk about what's causing all of this to happen. So go back. Here we go. Okay. This is one of, I'll call it, 2 major charts that you should pay attention to. And this is something on a by country basis you can your governments report these kinds of things. So this is from the Federal Reserve. This is inventory to sales ratio. Now, if you look on the right side of this chart, you're going to see that when the pandemic hit, and that's in that little thin gray bar, all right, inventory shot up because no one was buying everything for about a month, and then people started buying, all right, and because we were still in a ramp-up mode, inventory levels went down, but they have continued to fall, all right. So, you know, if we went pre-pandemic, we'd say the average, and you can see it on this chart, was probably around $1.45 of inventory for every dollar of sales, and now we're down at around 1.1. Now, everyone on this session today will know this because when you go to the store, you don't see things on shelves. All right, there's not enough inventory, simply put, to cover the sales activity that's out there, right? So, and if you will, I documented on here, it's 32% less inventory today. All right, this is a big deal, okay, because we add the fact that we don't have enough inventory to the following, which is because of the slide I showed you before, retailers want more inventory going forward. So we may not just need to recover to that 1.4 level. We may need to be higher than that, actually, for retailers to feel safe about having the stock that they have. You know, if you haven't heard this term, inventory is king at the moment. You know, if you have it, you can sell it. If you don't, you can't. It sounds so simple, but it is exactly what is happening. So on the next slide here, this is also important. This is probably, you know, when people say, what changed? What did the pandemic change? All right. So what the pandemic changed was the following here, which was, and it's a couple things to look at. One is that many people, not everybody, okay, but many people have actually done fairly well economically through the pandemic. So their incomes actually are either at or higher than where they were prior to the pandemic. And also as I'll call it the dust settled, the chaos settled, and not that life was great, but people understood what was going on. All of a sudden they had a fair amount of money. Even things like savings have gone up dramatically. But what also happened is the following. They had this money, and guess what? They wanted to spend it. And if you will, and I have two millennial children, millennials, classically, you've heard them, they want experiences. So what we were living through for really up to the pandemic was we were in the experience economy. People didn't want stuff, right? They wanted experiences. They wanted to travel and so forth. But that went away. All right, so international travel is just barely coming back right now. Things like concerts and going out for dinner and all kinds of other things like that are not they didn't exist, or they don't exist very much, right? So people have the money, all right, and they can't do it on experiences. What are they going to do? So so what happens is they have spent the money on stuff, goods, if you will, and that's what you're looking at here. All right. So what you see here is that the yellow bars is that growth, okay, of the amount of expenditures, okay, personal consumption expenditures. But what I also did was the blue line is the ratio of goods to services, and you can see that that's up, and it's actually up 8% since the beginning of the pandemic. So an 8% change is huge because we spend a lot more on services than we do on goods, and so that's really the essence of what's driving this here. So we have shifted buying patterns. So people want more stuff. U.S. is an import economy. Many countries, Canada, I could go on and on, are import economies and so forth. And so this is really what's happening. So we'll move on here. Give it a second. There we go. Okay, so I've talked about this. I'm going to jump a little bit further here. So the other thing that's happening is inflation rates. All right, this is a big deal. There's no doubt about it. It's happening, right? But what's also interesting here in this chart, and you can see it, is what we did was we looked at shipping, okay, and the last time was August that we had over 5% inflation. We had it for several months in a row. It didn't slow anything down. If anything, what you have is, I'll call it this classic seasonality, and you can see that in this chart, where we have slow periods and things pick up. So, you know, doesn't appear like it's going to put a dent in currently what's going on in terms of shipping volumes. Okay, so then what I want to get to is one more. Whoops. Let's hopefully this doesn't advance again here. So here what we have is the other key problem, and this is also truly a global problem, and I'll talk a little bit about that here. But there's not enough drivers, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about related to global shipping or even you know, last mile delivery, right? There's just flat out not enough drivers, and according to the ATA in the US, we're at 80,000 drivers short, and they expect it to go to 160 in 2030. So it's just going to get worse. Now, what's also interesting was we had pretty good jobs numbers last quarter. There were basically almost 250,000 less unemployment related filings. And so our rates are down to 4.6%, which is great. Now, if we dive into this a little bit more, we can see that there were 54,000 jobs created for transportation warehousing. But gotcha is the following: only 8,000 of those were drivers, actual drivers. So we're challenged here. We're clearly challenged to have enough drivers. And the problem is that when I say this, everyone is hiring, is we're competing with you know, all manner of business. Could even be warehousing, like I said, on the logistics space, but it's all manner of business is hiring. And so, you know, driving can be a challenge, especially long haul driving. It can be tough on families and so forth. So this is going to be a big deal, and this will go beyond the pandemic, as you can see by the numbers here. Now, you know, I mentioned before, the US is not the only place that has this issue. And UK is in really much worse shape than the US, and some of that is pandemic, but part of this is also Brexit. If you don't know this, basically they lost about 60,000 drivers that were from the EU that were no longer able to operate in the UK. So they had a self-inflicted flushing of capacity here. And I'll just give you a little crazy anecdote. I happened to a day ago be reading an online publication out of the UK, and they were talking about shipping wine by train for the holidays because they could not get it in and delivered in the UK. So they actually literally will have every week hundreds of thousands. Like the first shipment I saw was like 600,000 bottles of wine that were coming in. I think it's this week or next week into the UK, and then using the rail network to get it out. Because there's just not enough drivers here. So same type of situation in terms of the some of the fundamentals here. But you know, at the end of the day, this, like I said, is going to be one that's going to be with us for a while. Okay. Now, I also wanted to cover the pandemic itself, right? And you know, like I said, it's actually quite amazing what has been done through the pandemic in terms of the shipping volumes and how big they are, but they're happening, right? Yeah, it's not all you know, the way we want it to go, but it's really actually fairly stunning. But the pandemic is still out there and is still actually impacting markets and countries, and this is something you need to keep an eye on here. So here's what I want you to think about here, and Vietnam is really just a very good case of this. So that they did really well with the pandemic in 2020. They actually, you know, shut the country down and were able to weather this. And if you look at their 2020 volumes, which is the orange line compared to the green line, 2019, they were much higher, right? And look at what 2021 looks like for the first half of the year, really booming in terms of export to the U.S. for furniture. And if you don't know this, that they are a rising star in the furniture, global furniture markets because of their manufacturing capacity, right? But look what happened by the time we hit September and October. their volumes really fell through the floor. And why that happened was because in the summer, they were hit very hard with COVID, particularly the new Delta variant. And because the low vaccination rate, and it's just that's a number, right? Okay, so that people were not immunized, and therefore they had to go through massive shutdowns again of factories and so forth. And so there was no furniture to ship, and so you can see we had a 50% decline in the span of 2 months here. So there's still a fair number of places in the world where vaccine rollouts are still underway, and there's not that many people who have been vaccinated. So as you look at your own businesses, this is something to keep an eye on here. The variants that are out there now are more invasive, and until we get many more people around the globe vaccinated, we're going to see these kinds of situations pop up. All right. So then another thing I wanted to talk about really was what's happening, what are people doing to address these issues here. So in the U.S., there's actually almost 500 million square feet of warehousing space under construction right now. That is just absolutely phenomenal. And why that's happening is, remember we talked about the fact that people are going to want to hold more inventory, that inventory is king at this point in time, and so forth. And also really because a lot of goods are being delivered direct to homes, and I didn't even get into that conversation, but that's also been a phenomena of the pandemic. Okay, we have so much being built. Equally, there are 619 ships on order and to be built over the next 5 years. Okay, and representing, it's 5.3 million. It should have had an M there. 5.3 million TEUs, and that's a huge amount of capacity that will be coming online. What I've also heard is they're going to be fairly large ships, somewhere in the 16,000 TEUs. So trying to move a lot of goods. That has been the trend in the market. Larger ships. It's going to continue. But when we look at this here, it's both of these are 1 to 3 year and really even beyond as far as ships go, in terms of them coming online and making a difference. Okay. But what's also important here, and we're going to talk about it for a second, is, but that doesn't change the ports. All right. So the Port of LA has a current limit in terms of effective processing of containers. Having more ships show up isn't going to solve that problem. All right. And so that's something we want to think about here. And I will talk about that in the recommendations. The good news here on the longer term front is that the U.S. infrastructure funding has gotten approved, and there are things specifically targeted at addressing the ports. And again, it's not just LA; it's really a number of the ports that really need some changes. And I'll skip the details there, but there's quite a bit going on. Will be going on, but we should not think about this for the next 3 years. All right. Some of these things are going to be structural that need to change. If you're familiar with concepts called inland ports, where basically they're going to take things off the ship, put them right on trains, move them inland to be deconsolidated and so forth. You're going to see things like that, and a number of other activities that are going to go on to increase capacity, but not in the next couple of years. So I did have some recommendations for people, and I'm happy to answer any other questions as we go through this in terms of things you might want to address. Okay, one of them is if your capacity is constrained here and you're not being able to move things at the levels that you would want to, is we recommend that people focus on shipping we call the high velocity, high margin goods. If you've got limited space that you can get your things moved, let's focus on the ones that are going to basically generate the best returns for the business. We've seen this in a lot of companies already that have really pulled back, and I'll be honest with you, you're going to see this in the stores too, especially over the holidays. The second thing is if you are in the supply chain business one way, shape, or form here, having drivers, warehouse workers, etc. Hiring is a challenge. All right. So and you're going to need to keep doing it, but what we also recommend is people focus on really reducing worker stress as a way to keep people. So there's an old saying, a bird in hand is worth two in the bush, right? So you've got people, make sure you can keep them, particularly drivers. This is going to be the case, and there are things that can be done to with better route planning and trip planning and so forth to make this better for drivers. Interesting enough, that's becoming the #1 factor. I'm sure for any of you that know that are in that part of the business, you know that driver pay has gone up significantly. Even warehouse worker pay has gone up. But the reason people are leaving is not necessarily pay anymore. It's really around I'll call it work-life situation and stress in particular. The next thing on the near term, so what do you do with what you have, right? One of the things we're recommending is that you evaluate less congested transportation lanes and to possibly improve both the velocity and reliability. And we think reliability is as important as velocity here. And so what am I getting at is if you're running everything, for instance, through LA or Long Beach, and I just don't want to pick on them, but they're kind of top of mind right now for everybody. There are other ports on the West Coast that should be considered that may have capacity that you may not have considered. It might be a little bit more expensive, but you may find yourself moving things quicker and on a more repeatable basis than where those are. We're seeing people move things to the East Coast, which of course is why you're seeing, for instance, like Savannah or the New York, New Jersey ports pick up their times as well. But this is one of the things where we believe that this is, this is a good tactical move that you can make. We've even seen some shift, a very small shift, but some shift of higher value goods moving to air. It's a last resort, but in terms of running businesses, this is kind of what we've seen as well. People are, they're out there with all of their options on the table. Now, longer term. This is where we think people should evaluate supplier and factory location density. What I mean by that is that over the years, this whole economy of scale concept has played out very well for organizations that, hey, there's a lot of volume, transportation volume in certain trade lanes, as an example, and so forth, and I can jump on that, and it's moving faster, and maybe it's cheaper, and so forth. But density is a two-edged sword, and we saw this through the pandemic. People that said, well, I have 5 locations in China and they're spread out, I'm okay. And when the country shut down, no, they weren't, right? So this is where we think that you should really look at concepts like nearshoring or other locations. Like I said, people have moved, especially in things like furniture, moved it out of China to Vietnam, as an example. This is where we think people should start looking at that location density and really, look at where you want to source in the future here. Because, like I said, at the end of the day, it's about having the goods here. So a lot of rethinking going on in supply chains because of all of this. I guess the very last thing I'll say before we open this up to questions is that the most important thing to understand is that the current situation is going to be around at least through 2022, but there will be many remnants of it after that. That means that you're really going to need to think about how you're running your global supply chains and managing global transportation. So Amanda, that's it. I'm open to questions.
All right, perfect. Well, we do have a couple of questions that came through. So one of the questions was, could you provide some additional details on the driver shortage?
Sure. So what's happening here, and this is what's important to understand, is there's a couple things that are going on. So it's not like we can look at one way to fix it. So the biggest one is the following. The average age of a driver is going up, all right, really pretty significantly, all right? So we are hitting that classic retirement age problem here. There's not been a lot of adoption by like millennials and Generation Z or whatever it is now to become drivers, all right? So That's one of the things where, for instance, driver programs and so forth are going to be so important going forward. But you really need to look at it from that perspective. So really the biggest thing is going to be retirement over the next. And that's why they keep saying the number is going to go up. The other thing, as I mentioned, it's going to be around people having options for jobs and decent paying jobs. Being the employer of choice is going to be so important to keep the folks that are there and doing a good job to be able to manage that driver stress and work life and so forth.
Sounds like they need to be targeting this as a more vocational career choice with our high school programs, particularly in the U.S., but it sounds like they need to expand that elsewhere too, because as you've mentioned, it is turning into a very lucrative career from a financial standpoint and pay standpoint, and it's not going anywhere.
No, it's going to be more important than ever.
All right, thank you. The second one was, what other countries like the UK, what other countries are facing like the UK, and how has Brexit impacted global shipping?
Well, so we're also seeing, like I said, I focus really today a little bit more on, I'll call it U.S. numbers, but we're seeing the same situation in Rotterdam, Antwerp, other places like that have that same situation, and part of the challenge is there's a massive imbalance in global logistics going on right now. And so what I mean by that is because certain markets are so lucrative, shipping container costing 20,000 to go from China to the U.S. is that a lot of assets have gotten redirected, and so there's not this classic balance that had existed for so many years. So now it's really hard. We don't have capacity where we expect to have it, and we don't have things like containers where we need to have them. So, a ship without containers is not, not beneficial, right? But equally, if you don't have a container, you can't ship, right? So that's the gotcha that is going on globally.
Okay. We had one come in, and this is quite interesting. So I'll be happy to hear your answer on this. What do you know about the concept of self-driving trucks like we have with some electric vehicles?
It's going to come along. There's a lot of energy and effort into it. It'll be years before it happens. Actually, I do know a little bit about this space. So here's the way to think about this. It will take off in areas where traditional long haul driving is going on, all right? And so long haul driving is, let's call it very much point to point. A lot of I'll call it distribution centers and so forth are positioned close to highways, major highways. So think of and they've done that deliberately, right? So the moving things from point A to point B are going to be the ones that you're going to see, self-driving vehicles. But it's going to come along at a very slow level. There's so much legislation and so forth, and so much concern there. Where you won't see it in the near term is going to be for the classic last mile local delivery types of things. Those are meant multi-stop and so forth. Not only that, you have to have someone to get the goods off the truck, right? So when it's point to point and you're going from, some manufacturer's distribution center to some big retailer's distribution center, someone can load the truck and go, truck pulls in, empties, right? Or just drops the trailer as an example. That truck does not have to have a human involved, in actually then getting the goods off, right? So that's how we need to think about it. But it's got a number of years before it's really going to make an impact in terms of this displacing what we have in terms of the driver shortage today.
Okay. Is the shortage of labor going to be an issue for crews on vessels as well?
Yes. Yes, and this is a big deal. Actually, there's a lot of negative uh, effects of COVID, where many crews were stuck for as much as 2 years because they were not allowed to get off in ports. And so, yeah, quality of life here not so great. So, adding more ships is just going to create that much more demand. That's another one that we're going to be looking at. Now, in general, even these large vessels, these 16,000 TEU vessels, they don't have a lot of people, right? We're not talking hundreds of people, right? It really could be in the tens of people, low tens of people. Those ships are so automated and so forth. So relatively speaking, adding more is not going to be like we're looking at 60,000 people as an example type of thing. But in terms of what has happened so far, there is a reticence to get into the business because of just what happened. You can get on and it's like the Hotel California song, right? You can check out, but you can never leave. That was what was happening.
Yes, that certainly is not a good quality of life. There's nothing lucrative that seems appealing about staying on a ship for 2 years.
Right.
Oh, wow. Okay, so moving along, do you have any insight on the supply chain issues happening in Brazil?
No, that one I don't. I apologize there, but that one I don't. But that is something. I'll just say the following. That is something we most likely have data on. I just haven't pulled anything for that.
Okay, perfect. I may follow up with you on that if you don't mind.
Okay.
Okay, and our industry ships and parcel tankers, as well as in containers, are parcel tankers impacted as badly as container vessels?
You're talking about bulk shipping?
Yes.
Well, that's a good question. It's different. It's different. So let's do it this way. Not as much. I guess about the best, easiest way to describe this. At one level, let's call it bulk chemicals, dry goods, etc. They're at the backside of that food chain in terms of whatever they do. Whatever those things are going to turn into what gets on containers. So the answer is going to be ultimately yes. There's going to be an increase, but when you look at it. When you look at the ports and everything that are, moving those goods like a Houston or something else like that, they're in actually relatively decent shape at the moment. So I would say we're not seeing it as much. That would just be my general comment.
Okay. So I'm going to paraphrase this one just slightly so that we can be a little more politically correct. Are ports that only have union drivers on site, if that changed to allow non-union drivers or opened up those restrictions, would that help the supply chain crunch? I think the answer is yes, but maybe you can give us some insight as to how much that potentially could affect some ports.
Yeah, so actually, I'll separate the union, non-union thing into two pieces here, okay, which I think will help explain it, all right? And one I did not cover here, which I really should have. So a lot of the drivers going into the ports are non-union, all right? They work for various dray haul companies and so forth. So that's not the union challenge. The union challenge in the U.S. is the International Longshoremen Workers Union, ILWU, okay? And by the way, their contract is up next July. And it's been contentious in the past. Every time they come up, right, for negotiations, whether it's slowdowns or an actual strike or whatever. I am no expert in any of that other than to tell you historically that it's never been great. So here's what I expect to happen, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier too, is we actually expect people to move inventory sooner in anticipation of that happening next spring, basically. So we don't expect, that's one of the reasons why we don't expect the container volumes, as an example, to go down, any kind of shipping volumes in, because if the ports workers strike, then, you know, there's no, that's just going to be just a mess, right? So that's actually going to put more pressure on. So less so on the driver side, definitely on the port worker side.
Wow. And it sounds like they know that they have an advantage at this point too, because the supply chain is so critically dependent upon their work. So that is going to be something that we will follow. I'm sure you'll be following that as well. So I'll be paying attention to your blogs to see what is transpiring in that particular industry and with that issue. Okay, so we have one last question, and that is, what indicators should we look for to show a return to normalcy for global shipping?
Okay, great. I'd say the number one thing is going to be that ratio that I talked about on personal consumption of services and goods. You know, if the pressure will come off when people have another avenue to spend their money. So when you see international travel go up, you see more concerts, restaurants doing better. You know, think of all the ways that people spend their money on experiences and so forth. You know, Disney World, etc. Right? All that kind of stuff. That's really what has to happen. You know, so that's why I think this is a little protracted here. You know, for probably the next 2 years, because that's going to take a while for that all really to kick in again. And so that was really the thing that's going to take the primary heat off of you know, the global shipping.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Chris, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise and insight. We will be sharing your presentation and a copy of this recording with the attendees today, and with also those, there were several who had registered but could not attend. This also will be posted on our website. I will mention that Descartes publishes a monthly newsletter, and I believe that it's coming out on the 15th with some new data. So if you're interested in that, please visit their website to take a look at that. Also, as part of the follow-up information that you'll receive, I'll include Chris's information. So if you have some follow-up questions for him, or if your company is interested in any type of consulting services from them or expertise to pick their brain, you'll have his contact information as well. So I wanted to just remind everyone that we do have some additional webinars that are coming up dealing with some other issues within our industry, and sustainability, as that is our other big buzzword and topic beyond the global shipping. So I hope that you'll join us there. And Chris, thank you again for all of your time and attention, and for taking the extra initiative to pull the data related directly to our industry as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Amanda, and everybody that's participated. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions if I can, and you'll know how to get a hold of me here shortly. So have a great weekend. Thank
you. You as well. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and we hope to see you on December 2nd for our next webinar. So thank you very much, and everyone have a great day. Bye, Chris.
Bye. Bye, man.